Hello and welcome. This is the Growth Strategy podcast and live stream. And this week and every week, I try and introduce you to interesting people that I think might help your business or career. The chap who I'm going to introduce you to today is someone that I'm actually working with on a really exciting project in relation to offshore wind. And today is going to be heavily renewables focused due to kind of Maf's background. But actually, if you want to win more work in the sector, grow your business, especially offshore, this is a great kind of 40 or so minute conversation to watch. But if you don't have 40 minutes, I'll clip it all up and it'll go on YouTube and that kind of thing as well. So I hate to kind of mess you around or waste your time. So I'm going to bring Maf in. There we go. Cool. Well, you're now live and everyone can see you. Would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hello, good to see you all, and thanks, Steve, for the opportunity to be here.
No worries. You can relax. Nobody's going to attack you. It just it can often be very nerve-wracking. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about how when you do this live, it's a whole different ball game because we had a Zoom call together 2 hours ago, didn't we? So it's a different kind of dynamic.
Yeah, it's just like the old days of my RUK work, doing, it takes the camera live on the green outside Parliament Square, and thinking, did I get that right? Did I get that right?
Well, you only get one shot at it, but I enjoy the jeopardy. I find I perform better over time. And actually, just before we came on camera, I was doing some video for someone else, and it's funny that the more experience you get doing this, you learn to pace yourself and breathe and don't say and it is a good kind of skill to practice just over time, and especially now video is so important for everyone's kind of business and career.
And we're all still learning about Zoom and what we thought was an artificial medium now being a default medium, if you like. And it's interesting how we've had a year of it almost, and we're still figuring it all out, aren't we?
I'm with you. So would you like to give a brief introduction about who you are and your background?
Yeah, so I'm Maf Smith. I'm a director of a consultancy called Lumen Energy and Environment. It's a company that I set up at the start of this year. Impeccable timing. My wife and I run it, which I'm the Lumen Energy part and she's the Lumen Environment part. We do complementary things. So we share it as a company vehicle, if you like. So the work I do is primarily on renewables, and almost all of that is in offshore wind, doing a few different bits and pieces. So this summer I got appointed to be the specialist advisor for the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee, which is really interesting. So I'm advising them on heat pumps at the moment, helping them through their current inquiry. And I work with different clients. I'm working with GWEC on global offshore wind. And I'm working with you, Steve, on the new West project, which the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership is running, which we'll come back to.
Yeah.
So lots of cool stuff.
Good stuff. So we probably first met when I was working at the LEP in Tees Valley, probably a good 10 years ago. Hell of a lot of offshore wind stuff, which at the time was trying to attract new investment into the sector. Round 3 had just been kicked off, so 21 will probably explain it later. There's been different rounds of offshore wind developments in the UK. Started with round 1, then round 2, which is bigger, and big round 3, which is bigger still, which is kind of to go into construction pretty much from now to 2025 or so. But these things take years and years and years to plan. So on the actual kind of government side, it starts 10 years ago and it kind of rolls through. And that's probably where we first met at a lot of kind of renewables-based events. But what I always try and do with every week when I talk to different people is that I think it's genuinely interesting for people to learn a bit more about your backstory, how you got into doing what you do, and again, it's the story which adds a lot of value. But then likewise, there's a lot of people that want to follow in your footsteps about, one day setting up their own business. And again, it's always really important to understand your background and your niche and your skill set that you apply in that particular area, and hence kind of walking through the journey. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure. Well, start where we are today. So until the start of this year, I was the Deputy Chief Executive at RenewableUK, the trade body. I've been there 7 years and done different roles, always as the CEO, but covered different functions of the organisation. When I left, I wrote a blog about it, and I wrote how, it's, when you look back upon your career, you suddenly realise how you thought you used to be a young Turk, and then all of a sudden you realise you're a greybeard, and how I transitioned. And I've been involved in the industry in different ways. I've come in and out of offshore wind for 20 years. So I was around during round 1, I started my work in the industry before round one, the first offshore wind farms had been built. And I was early in my career, and I was working in Barrow and Furness. And indeed, I grew up on South Humberside, so where a lot of the activity offshore wind is now. So I kind of feel it's sort of tracking me in some way. And I was working in Barrow and Furness for an energy project that the council and the European Union were funding. And we started on energy efficiency, and then we moved into energy advice and education, and we did business advice, and then people started to talk about offshore wind as a thing that was coming. It was a discussion. And I kind of took a punt on it and said, I think there'll be offshore wind in Morecambe Bay area. And so I started to talk about it, started to try and find out about it, went and talked to the British Wind Energy Association, talked to local businesses, talked to a guy called Jeremy Sainsbury, who many in the industry know. He's a director of Natural Power, but he'd at the time built a project in the Solway Firth. And then through that, just got it sort of fell into offshore wind. And I remember my standing in front of a meeting on environmental opportunities in the town hall in Barrow and Furness, in front of a group of about 200 people, and I had a short slot to talk about renewables and my work. And it was the day before the round one leasing project, and all the bids were announced. And I said confidently, there will be a wind farm off the coast of Barrow. And the day after it was announced, and there was a wind farm called Barrow proposed, and everyone thought I had some kind of inside track knowledge, or was some kind of genius. And then that was it. Off I went. So I was organising trips for councillors and business people to go up to Blythe, to the first sites where there were 2 wind farms, 2 wind turbines off the coast, about half a mile offshore. I remember going out on these little boats thinking, why would you build a wind farm out here? Going up and down in these small catchment grounds. And then from there, I went to Scottish Renewables, and I was appointed as essentially the first member of staff for Scottish Renewables. So I was its business development manager, but I was it. I did everything from, send out all the emails and do the accounts to meeting with all the CEOs of these companies. And I grew that organisation, took on more staff. From there, went into government. From there, went into consult, got laid off. When change of governments come in and they change their priorities, and all of a sudden they don't need you. And then from there, I ended up at RenewableUK. And then 7 years there, and now here I am. So I feel that my career has tracked the growth of renewables. When I started, renewables was 2% of GB electricity. Modest. No one thought it would go anywhere. And now the conversations around offshore wind alone, providing all the electricity for all the householders in Britain. We have changed our scale of our opportunity and our scale of ambition, and it's great to have helped make that happen, and I've just been part of that, and also to think there's still so much more we have to do. For the last part of my career, next part of my career, I've got to do as much again as I've already achieved.
No, very cool. Can I ask, did you go to uni?
Yeah, so I went and I did when I was a kid, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Like all kids, you bounce around a bit. I was going to be a doctor, and I did science A levels, even though humanities is probably my best subject. But I wanted to be a doctor, so I did science A levels, and then in the sort of between the first and the second year of sixth form, I went off to do work in the local hospital, and then by the end of that, I knew I didn't want to be a doctor, and so I had these A levels I didn't know what to do with, so I ended up studying law at a university called Keele in Staffordshire, because it was a university that essentially it allowed you to do any subject with any combination of A levels, provided you did sort of these insets sort of direct days in training. So I did that, and then during that I ended up focusing on environment and environmental law, European law, and so I went on to Lancaster and did a master's degree in European environmental regulation, and then from that got me my first job in Barrow, working for the town hall on Agenda 21, which some people may remember. It was an early precursor to sustainable development. And from that, I ended up working in energy, running this energy office, and that was my jump into renewables.
Before we kind of go into the detail on offshore wind, and thank you, Matthew Ward, for the comment. He works for a company called LV Shipping, fantastic Northeast kind of company. And before we go into the detail on offshore wind and kind of a lot of the backstory and what it is and different projects and different kind of stuff, can I ask you what it's like to work, or what it was like to work at Renewable UK? Because as an outsider kind of looking in, I'm a chartered mechanical engineer by background, so I understand technically stuff. But actually, whenever you enter a new industry, you're always trying to find information from somewhere. And the people I saw at the top of the tree was yourselves. And it's almost, but as an organization that looks after lots of different technologies and stakeholders and things, what was it like to work there? What were your interactions with government like? And actually, how did the whole thing feel like from the inside?
It was a really great experience. It was my second trade association, so I'd already experienced Scottish Renewables, and that was a difficult job, and that was lots of technologies and very few people. Whereas Renewable UK was a much larger organisation, and I enjoyed working with the members and the people, because you got to learn so much, and particularly with our UK staff, you would learn really bright people coming in who are really passionate about climate change and renewables, and doing great things, working really hard. So Renewable UK has always had a really strong ethos that's come from the staff.
Mm-hmm.
When I was there, Hugh McNeil, now the outgoing chief executive, wanted to do work to embed and instill culture, but he was really clear that it wasn't about him saying what the culture would be, but about recognizing that culture that existed. And it's always been a strength, even in hard times for the organization, that you have a network of people who care for each other and support each other. And then you have a network of members who are really keen, and individuals in those companies want to achieve things and get things done. So when it works, it's great. You've got this real feeling of momentum. I think the problems I experienced come from either when government stops listening, which they did while I was there. We had a Conservative Lib Dem coalition, and then a Conservative government, and there were ups and downs in policy, and that was when Cameron's green crap stuff was coming out, and offshore wind and onshore wind were good, and then they were no good, and how you had to fight that and manage expectations. And the problem with the trade bodies, if things are going against you in the policy sphere, well, you might not cause that, but you're the people who are paid to help fix that. And of course, some of these things take a long time. So it's great to see now Renewable UK working, if you like, with the wind behind it, because it's got a government who's finally come around to all the values that wind offers, not just offshore but onshore as well. And when, for example, Boris Johnson in September, October stood up at the Conservative Party conference, gave a speech where he said for the first time what many people knew he'd sort of drip fed about offshore wind being critically important and setting a target of 40 gigawatts. So he restated for the first time the manifesto commitment. And he cleverly said, and some people used to say that wind would never even blow the skin off a rice pudding. But I say, and it was a clever thing to do because he was the person who said that.
Yeah.
And so his mind has been changed, and the mind of the Conservative Party was changed, and the mind of a lot of people was changed because of facts and and evidence you couldn't ignore, and the work of people like Renewable UK. So,
okay.
Yeah.
No, it was just as an outsider, almost with any trade body, and there are lots, and there are some really, really good ones. I was on a webinar from one earlier today, and it's just they play a valuable role. Like a lot of it is stakeholder engagement that people often don't see. But I just thought I wanted to pick your brains. Yeah. So can we start with a more generalist approach on renewables? And likewise, because I clip this up for YouTube into like 6-7 minute segments, it'll be brilliant when it flows through, before we go into the detail. But why do you think renewables are important for like the UK as a whole?
They're the best route we have to decarbonise, while also bringing jobs and employment into parts of the economy that often lose out, and helping bits of the economy which are difficult to fix. to get with the plan and decarbonize. So what I mean by that is, so for example, where I grew up in on South Humber, me and most of my peer group, the kids who went off to university, hardly any of my friends went home because there weren't many graduate jobs. So, you get that shift to the big population centres. I ended up in Glasgow, but lots of people go to London or Manchester. You get those sorts of shifts. So people stay where they went to college.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a sort of a pull of home because there weren't things to do there. But whereas now you see Siemens Gamesa Hall, you see Ørsted and so many others with strong big bases in Grimsby. There's excitement in the area. So it does that. It gives people hope. It gives people jobs. It gives field employment and things that people can get involved in that they care about. And I'm struck when I do talks. I used to do a lot with RenewableUK about the values that people have. People want jobs which are meaningful, and they also want jobs which are they can be sure are stable. So offshore wind does that. It gives people heart, and it also decarbonizes. And it gives us routes out of some intractable problems, such as, well, the UK relies on oil and gas to underpin its economy. It's a major component of the economy. Well, yes, it is, but we can now find a way to use those skills to do other things like hydrogen or floating offshore wind, or rather than saying we don't need you anymore, we can say we need you, but we need to do things differently. Because I enjoy how it's offshore wind is now talked. So oil and gas is talked about not as a fuel, or it won't be a fuel. It will be a feedstock in, making things we need. So its role in our economy will change, and underpinning our economy in the future will be renewables and offshore wind. And that's great to be part of it, and it's great to be right if you've worked in something for so many years too.
Because I must admit, with one of the things that I would almost, in oil and gas's defence, is that companies and countries look to do whatever the economic engine is at the time. And from the 70s up until now, but actually for another 40 odd years, oil and gas will always play an important part of it. But what's quite interesting is the transferable skills from oil and gas into renewables and vice versa. And for me, almost touching on the reason why offshore wind is really important for the UK, and almost this came back to, people always used to complain about subsidies. And why does one technology get a government subsidy, why other one doesn't? And one of the big crucial parts always was to invest in technologies to make them more commercial, so therefore reduce the unit cost so that the country has more options to pick from as a more diverse source of energy than otherwise. But I remember 10 years ago, there was a lot of opposition when people would say, you'll never get the cost down in offshore wind. And from memory, I think it was £157 per kilowatt hour, which was the strike price at the time. And now, is it 50-ish? It depends on the latest project, but the costs have genuinely come down.
They're underneath £40. Yeah. So it's reduced by 3 times. And you're right about oil and gas. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work with companies now, and West is a part of that, but I'm doing it separately, one-on-one with companies in oil and gas who are looking at how they move into offshore. And one of the things I'm really enjoying is these companies with vast expertise. They've got products, services, and they explain what they do. Wow, that's cool. There's deep sea robotics, remote monitoring, data. They're cutting edge companies who very specialized in oil and gas and have worked in that way for years. Now realizing that they need to diversify. They need to be part of this shift. But equally, they say, do you think we'll be okay? Should we rebrand ourselves? Should we, become a separate renewable division? And I tend to say no, because you can explain your deep expertise, and you can explain what you can offer this transition.
I'm glad you said that.
Be part of that acceleration.
Because I give the same advice. And it's because I didn't know what you were going to say there. I probably would have kept quiet if you said something different. But the other thing as well, which is quite interesting, is that the UK is the world leader in offshore wind. And part of that reason is that we're an island. But actually, we're a very well located island that happens to have 40% of Europe's wind resource within its waters. And one of the things that's really important why there's a lot of investment going into the sector, and then we'll jump on to what we're doing in a second. But actually, it's the fact that learning our craft now on things like floating offshore wind, which is needed for kind of deeper water projects, because the UK is leading the world in it. If a company from North Shields or the guys we spoke to this morning from London really learn the craft, learn the technology, learn the skills, we can sell this everyone in the world as the leader in that particular technology. So actually, like the program that we're working on, and we'll jump onto West now, and I'll let you do the honors. But it's almost where if you're willing to try to diversify new skills into new sectors, the global growth in offshore wind is so huge, especially in the US and China, the Far East, that it's great to find your feet, learn the technology, and there is a massive growing market out there to really kind of sell into, because that's the big thing that almost historically people would always champion renewables for the carbon reasons, which I agree with, I don't disagree with. But on a purely business level, just for the business opportunity, that is more than worth chasing. And I think now, because it's proven and these projects get bigger and bigger and bigger, I think it's worth talking about. So would you like to jump into the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership and then West, the project we're working on?
Sure. Well, Offshore Wind Growth Partnership is a program managed by the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is an agency which gets government and private funding to support the industry and innovation. And the industry has funded it to provide advice, services, and support to the supply chain, helping companies bring forward new ideas, innovation, helping companies new to offshore wind learn about it, figure out how they could fit in. So you and I are both working on a program called West, which is a sort of the entry-level program. Companies get funding for a few days' time of people like you and me to help them take their idea, test it, direct it, explain to them how the market works, explain to them which companies they need to talk to, explain the scale of the opportunity, give them a bit of business growth, and send them on their way. And then there are other phases in the growth partnership which can give them grants to, say, develop an idea or do some further innovation. And we're just starting it. It's wave one of the West program. We're working with a number of companies. We're one of a set of consultancies around the UK doing it.
Blatantly the best, though. I mean, just
of course. And what's nice is that Lumen is a consultancy that's been going for less than a year, and it's nice to be winning work. And it's worth highlighting why we got the work. In my view, my view is we got the work because we were able to come together as a group of people. So all the people who are doing it, me, you,
we can name check them.
We're all independent consultants. So Mike Newman, Leslie Black, Ina Block, Callum McCallum, Rich Furness. We're all working as independent consultants. We all bring different things. So instead of being a larger consultancy that, say, has a pyramid structure of people and consultants, we're all equivalents, and we sort of have a menu of expertise we can offer companies. And equally, if we hadn't come together, there's no way any of us on our own would have been able to win such a contract. So it's a really nice way of working, and it's something that we're all enjoying, and it's something where we're talking about how we can take it further. So there's different, in terms of business growth, working together and collaborating makes us all more successful, which is a nice thing. It's not about us looking over our shoulders and saying, "Oh, I can't talk to Steve because he does what I do." And the more we can communicate, you can see, the more we all benefit from that.
We had a question from Graham Morris. Hi, Graham. Where he asked about companies transitioning from oil and gas into renewables. Out of interest, are there any fact sheets, worksheets, things that we could always produce one, but to kind of give people the general steps? So one of the things that we're doing on an average of kind of 6 days consultancy with each company, going really in depth. I cover all of the sales, marketing, strategy kind of side to it. But actually, it's something that maybe we could do to give a more generalist overview. I'm sure it exists just for companies like Graham that might be earlier stage, just to kind of get into the market.
Yeah, there's good information out there available from groups like RenewableUK and the Catapult itself. We're looking at what we can do to offer, and we do intelligence and introductions to markets, help break it down, how it works, who's who, how long do projects take, how do they contract. There's lots of simple stuff, which some of it's very specific about individual projects or companies or technologies, but a lot of it applies across the sector. And the more you can do that and help people, and groups like RUK or NOF in the Northeast, and that's their bread and butter, where they help companies understand the sector and help make it easier for them to get involved in offshore wind.
I've got you. Can I ask you a very topical question, but because it's really important to the UK and people would lose respect for me if I didn't ask it. What's your view on UK content and how strict the government is being on actually implementing it?
Sure. Well, there's two parts. I'm working in Scotland at the moment, which you have to be able to bid into a project. You have to prove what you're going to do in Scotland. And then the UK government is now consulting on a beefed up version of what's called supply chain plans. I have mixed views. So UK content is important and we need to do more about it. But the offshore wind industry essentially can't solve it by itself in isolation, because some things are about how the wider economy works. So the UK on the whole has been an economy which has not prioritized investment in manufacturing. You know, we've built up a service economy. We have success in investment. You know, we have a healthy economy, but it's different to others in the German economy, Danish economy. So we start from different points, and you can't recreate, therefore, UK manufacturing excellence in offshore wind from scratch, particularly as you know, for some of those companies have got head starts. Having said that, the market is big enough, you can do things to encourage those companies to invest here. So the good work which was done to bring now Siemens Gamesa into Hull, that wouldn't have happened without government saying, we're going to try and make this happen. But equally, I would also like to see government do more in encouraging innovation and investment. And I think one of the things I see from consultancy and companies I work with is still a frustration that government can do early stage research well. There's lots of research programs, but you know what we all call the valley of death, the point just before you get it to being commercial and you can look after yourself and you'll succeed if you've got a good product. That point, that's where the UK does funding really badly. And so I see companies fail or struggling to get through that, or crawling forwards when they should be able to take big steps at that point and get to market quickly. And I think if we could fix that, we'd have many more innovators coming into the market, really sort of, you know, being able to say, I've got a great idea for offshore wind. And being able to prove themselves and win work.
Because I think one of the things that really irks people in northeast of England, Humberside, and also in Scotland as well is through fabrication. And this is true in a lot of different sectors because it's how it. So if one of the companies I'm a director for makes subsea equipment and they sell all around the world, and we can do that, fabrication, due to its logistics and size, is not something that you can just fabricate stuff in Middlesbrough and easily and commercially send it to China or wherever. And it's how we play the argument to really help support UK business. And actually one of the things that I used to see, and it was almost from my time at the LEP public sector myself, was that there's something called state aid rules, which is part of the EU, which, you know, you're not allowed to subsidize or support companies over a certain level using government money. Otherwise it's seen as being anti-competitive. Arguably with Brexit, I don't know actually how much that still applies. It'll depend on the negotiation. But in theory, touch wood, the potential was still there for the UK that it didn't have to follow EU state aid rules as tightly as it had done. Because one of the things that I used to find 10 years ago was that the UK would follow it to the letter of the law, but other places in Europe, other EU countries, very famous big ones, would be more lenient with their own supply chain. And it was one of those things that's I think often some of the things that people forget when, yes, Brexit has a lot of negatives, but there's still some potential positives, which, you know, because offshore wind is a sector that will grow for another 100 years.
Sure, but I worry about that. I mean, so you're right about state aid, but it's not that state aid stopped us doing stuff, it's our attitude to how we applied the rules stopped us doing things, as you say. And so, for example, major ports in Europe fabricating floating offshore wind platforms, you know, they've been able to benefit in part because of the tax structures. And we don't offer those sorts of benefits or fiscal underpinnings, or subsidies in the way that others do that are clearly state aid compliant, because otherwise they'd be challenged and swept away. So in the conversation about Brexit, a lot of the tenor of it is we'll be able to do things differently, and we'll be able to be more innovative, or we'll be able to be more dynamic. And my worry is, well, that'll be great, but where was the evidence of trying to be dynamic and pushing against those rules? It wasn't there. So the worry with Brexit would be we still have that old mindset, but we no longer have, if you like, that market. So if we can be dynamic, brilliant, because it will really help. But if we're not going to be, then we won't get those benefits of it, which could really support offshore wind companies and supply chain companies, and some of those traditional industries as well.
Cool. Because as a seamless kind of segue, you mentioned they're floating offshore wind. Just so people almost understand the technology difference of how this has happened. So offshore wind projects, when originally planned and developed, you looked at what's the cheapest, easiest way to get the project off the ground, quite literally, that you would look for the fastest wind speeds at the shallowest waters. That's how it worked. Dogger Bank Round 3 is on a raised part of the seabed called Dogger Bank, which is therefore shallower. I think it's 30 to 60 meters, which actually allows you to build these massive wind farms relatively easily, because you can use technology called monopiles or jacket structures, which physically attach you to the ground. One of the challenges that you face is that as the turbines get bigger and you want better yield, you need faster wind. But you get faster wind at deeper water, and at a certain point, you can't use physical structures anymore because the water's too deep and it's too expensive and it's too difficult. Do you want to take over from there almost about how floating offshore wind is really important for the future?
Yeah, floating offshore wind essentially is a marriage of that fixed offshore wind you've just described, the bottom-mounted turbines which drill into the seabed, and oil and gas technology, where you have floating platforms, and oil and gas in very deep waters now, and they moved from having platforms anchored, drilled into the seabed, to floating platforms which are anchored. When I talk to oil and gas people about deep offshore wind, they don't see it as that. They see it as very shallow waters. But yes, we're moving to having these floating platforms, and there's a whole range of technology issues we have to sort out about what the best type of platform should be, how to make those platforms as cheaply and cost effectively as possible, the cabling, the anchoring, the mooring systems. There's a whole set of things that are being resolved. But we need to do that because in the UK, we will run out of those shallower sites. UK East Coast has a lot of development activity, and it's getting busy. So we need to look further afield. We need to look into Scotland, Scottish waters. We need to look in the southwest of England, where there is great wind resource, but it's much deeper. And the same goes true around the world. Most of the world's offshore wind resource, the best place to build wind farms are in deeper waters.
Japan, Portugal.
Japan, Portugal, they don't have a shallow bit of beach which slopes gently off into the sea for a few miles. It goes off and then it just goes down. They're on the edges of continental shelves. So they need floating offshore wind. And one of the great things is about the UK taking a leadership role is that the UK can help commercialize it, which will help other countries adopt it more quickly.
Very cool. If anyone has any more questions, please send them in and ask them if I can. The Growth Strategy podcast is all about business and growth strategy and, sharing people's own journey. So Maf, if you're happy, I wanted to ask you about when, as you went through your career, extremely successful, did a lot of really cool stuff. At what point did you almost get the itch to start your own business?
It was fairly recent. I mean, I was at RenewableUK, and as everyone does in jobs, trying to work out what I do next. So I ended up here sort of by accident. And sometimes, accidents sometimes work out really well. Sometimes they're terrible things, of course. But the plan, what had been, my wife is doing a PhD alongside also working and helping me and her bringing up our two young children. She was due to go to Canada for her research, so we said, well, let's go for a year and let's enjoy that. You get to do your research properly, and I'll look after the kids, and I'll bring in a bit of work in to help, help keep money coming in. And we were going to do that, and so I left my work, and COVID happened, and so all of a sudden we couldn't go to Canada because no one was allowed to travel anywhere, and if we'd gone to Canada, we'd have probably been sent home anyway. So the business vehicle that we created as a sort of a something that to help us over the next year or so suddenly became very important. So the priorities changed and the shifts changed. You have to think afresh about it. So it's something I sort of came upon, if you like, and it's been great. I'm enjoying it. It's not easy running your own business. You've got to do everything. I've worked in small organizations. I've worked as the only member of staff for an organization, so I know a bit about it. But you've got to do your own accounts. You've got to sort out all your own admin. No one else will answer the phone, etc. And you've got to do all the big thinking stuff, and you've got to deliver work for clients. So there's lots and lots of juggling. But you get to work with really interesting people and a much wider range of projects than I would work on if I was working in a single organization. So I mean, that's great. And the other, we've talked about how working together is good. The other thing I enjoy about working together is, for me, relatively new at this, you get to share experiences and failures and just watch what other people do and adopt it, and not have to do everything yourself, but to share information, share resources, share templates. There's lots of ways that we're all helping each other to sort of be successful and make it a bit easier.
Because one of the things which I think is important, which you did and I hopefully did as well, is that you get a lot of people that want to set up and do something. They want to set up on their own, but you've really got to find something which is a niche that you have. So for you, it's your knowledge network connections that not everyone else has. So therefore you've actually, people hire you for a reason because of everything that we've kind of talked about. And that makes you special, and therefore, brings you value. And it's what parts of actually setting up have you found the most difficult?
I think it is around that, figuring out where your role is. And a friend of mine gave me a lot of advice in setting up about what to do and how. And he was all about that, about know what your value is. And unless something's really unlimited, can't turn down, stick to within what you think is the thing you can really offer service value, because you won't get found out and you won't have people contacting you and then be disappointed. So there's some very good, lots of very good people in offshore wind in more technical consultancies. I could never hope to do any of those things. And just because that's not my aptitude, but equally because it's only me and it needs big teams working on projects. But there are things I can do that very few people can't do. And part of the reason is because I'm small, that I can do them. So I can give advice, I can help provide support, I can speak to senior people, I can help people engage in the industry and find out who's who. And I understand how that funny world between where government stops and industry starts, how that works, because that's really hard to navigate. It's not public affairs, but it's just about how policy leads to business decisions that work. But it is hard to define, and then, if you like, defend back to yourself why you're doing this and not something else.
Because I think
keep your nerve, if you like, well, as the work and get enough work in to justify that.
Because I was going to say, but I think that's almost one of the things which a lot of people struggle with, but rightly so they should, where, I guess it was only January that you were still Deputy Chief Exec of RenewableUK. And I was shocked that was still this year, because in my mind, you'd been set up. Obviously, we've been speaking for a while, but you've been set up for a lot longer. But there's always the element of you can set up your own business, develop a product, service, and try and sell it. And it takes a long time to get started. And there's the risk, the valley of death that you mentioned before you actually get profitable, etc. And it's always that versus a paid salary where you're going to get paid every month. And there is also that pull. And what's the famous quote? It's to do with a salary is the price you pay to give up your dreams. And it's just, I find this really funny that almost because working for yourself is difficult and you have to keep working and finding innovative ways to promote yourself and talk about your projects and stuff, that nobody else is going to help you. You have to do it yourself. but also that for me is almost, it's the fulfillment in the process, and the learning is actually what I enjoy the most.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, I think that's true, and you can get a lot of satisfaction out of it. And it's hard in terms of you work your regular hours, but equally I'm more able now because a lot more of us like anyway because of COVID, but more so because I'm running my own business. I've got some providing a plan ahead. I've got flexibility of my time to spend time with my kids, and
Awesome.
I'm not on a train commute where I'm off early and back late. I'm not traveling the length and breadth of the country or even going abroad, which I had been expected to do as part of my business. So the benefits of setting up a business in COVID is hard, but the benefits of you make it successful have been, and you get to spend more time than you thought, and you get to control your time. I've enjoyed that bit. And so I don't mind putting time at night onto, say, the website or marketing or the side tasks which you need to keep on top of, and it can be really enjoyable. So you can then use the daytime, if you like, to do the client work and the projects and the deadlines.
My big thing was that one day I will happily give this up if I've tried my best and I fail, but it's if I stop trying and I don't do what I think is the best I can do. That's the thing for me. So I have no problem if I do my very best and it just doesn't work out, fine. But it's that kind of, I didn't want to live with the regret, because I'm only 37, so I've still got a while left before I retire, that I just wanted to give it a crack. And for me, like the timing kind of worked out, and I thought, why not? So cool. Conscious of time, one of the questions which I ask all of my guests, and I kind of prepped you before the call, is what's the best piece of advice you ever had?
So it relates back to what we were just talking about business and knowing what you know and focus on that. You need to know what your skills are, what you do best, and and you need to then try and be better at that. So strengthening your USP. What is that, and how can I make it clearer, make it better, make it shine brighter? But equally, you've got to know what your Achilles heel is. What's your downside? What's the thing which lets you down and makes you go, oh, why did I do that? And you've got to put strategies in place to manage that. So mine is planning ahead, deadlines, not leaving things last minute. So I make sure I put time into those things, knowing that if I left to my own devices, I won't do that well enough and I end up catching up. So yeah, be your best thing you can, but know the other part, the flip side, the bit that's dragging you down and stopping you, and tackle them both.
Because I must say, just to throw some extra kind of context with that as well, that your view on that can change. So I don't know about you, because I only set up just over a year ago as well, but especially when you're starting out, it's harder to drive revenue and just make profit. That actually, when you start out, you're very conscious of costs, as you should always be, but you'll try and do more and more stuff yourself because you have to, which is fine. But actually, over a certain point, so for me, it was about 6 months in, I actually started to generate cash every month, which I could then reinvest in other stuff like this. But the point is, it's at the point, so finance is probably one of my weaker points because I'm not an accountant. I'm knowledgeable, I know what I do, I've run businesses before, but it's still the weakest point in my arsenal. But I'm now at the point where I could probably hire an accountant to look after that bit. But my point is, it's how it changed just from starting out 6 months into a year and a bit in. Your options that you can make to plug those weak points also change over time.
Yeah, and you've got more. You have to make more decisions when you get busy about what you do prioritize your time on. So therefore, what you contract out, and if you've got money, you've got some freedom to do that, which does help. But you still have to know how all those things work. Ian Marchant, who was the old chief executive for SSE, I once heard him speak to a senior government meeting where he was giving advice about running a successful business, being a CEO. And he defined a CEO as being the person who knew the second most about everything in the organization. So you didn't have to know anything more than anybody else, because you had to have someone in your organization who knew more than you. about the different bits of your business. But you need to always need to be one knows the second most. So you can always talk to them and pull them up and hold them to account and push them. And but running your own business means there's nobody else like that. So it's got to be you. So you've got to decide what you're going to focus on and decide what you're not going to do. So that USP point, I think, is really critical. Don't try to do too many things. There's only one brain to try and sort it all out.
I was going to say, I've done about 40 of these, and that's one of my favorite gems. That I love it. I love it. I think it's brilliant. If you were to give advice to your younger self, and you can pick any age, it could be the guy at school, it could be the start of your career, it could be even yourself a year ago, any whatever you want, what would it be?
Well, I need to tell you an anecdote about that first, if that's okay. So a few years ago, I went to Grimsby to the Lynx wind farm opening. And I was stood around outside, and a guy called Dave Laister, who I know really well now, he's the local journalist, he's covered renewables for years. And he came up and said, "Hi, Maf, how you doing? What do you think of Grimsby? Have you ever been before?" And I said, thinking, knowing what would happen, I said, "Well, I grew up around here." And we chatted about that. And all of a sudden, he brought the photographer over, and he took a picture of me in front of the Grimsby Dock Tower. And then they did a follow-up story which was basically Local Boy Made Good. And he used to joke whenever we did a press release. He used to joke on Twitter about our man in RenewableUK, or that Grimsby's voice in London and things like that. So, and then on the back of that, my local school, my comprehensive, got in touch and said, "Hi, dear Mr. Smith, we saw you in the Telegraph. Would you like to come and do our school prize giving?" And they wanted someone to come and talk about offshore wind and how it's a future opportunity. But I just wanted to go and talk to the young me in the school hall, set up prize giving, and I got to give out certificates. And then I gave a short speech. So I gave the speech that I would have wanted to hear, which probably wasn't the speech they had, because I didn't have a great time at school. And so my speech was essentially about, if you've got a plan, go and try and make it work. But if you don't have a plan, that doesn't matter either. But just go and do something, and go and see the world, and go and try things, and you'll find what you want to do. And don't let anyone tell you. The thing I most had was, I had a teacher tell me that these were the best years of your life. Never forget that. And I still have this very strong visceral memory of thinking, "Oh my God, that can't possibly be true, can it? Because this can't be the best it's going to be." And yeah, so just be able to tell my children, sort of the younger me, that don't worry, you'll be all right. And there's lots of good stuff waiting for you. You just have to go and do it. It was a really satisfying thing to be able to do.
Oh, cool. I like that. That's good. I must admit, it's funny, you see on X Factor and loads of things like that where people always say, "Oh, Strictly Come Dancing, my old school invited me in to speak to the kids." I wouldn't care if my school invited. I think people pretend that they actually want to do it. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
I nearly didn't do it. And I spent a long time, about a month, asking lots of people if I should do it, trying to find a good reason not to do it. But everyone kept saying, "Yeah, of course you should do it." So I was like, "All right, okay." And it was a big, I do a lot of public speaking. I used to do a lot of media. I'm used to speaking in front of large crowds, but it was one of the most nervous things I've been in the run up to doing it for, because it was a personal thing. It wasn't speaking on behalf of an issue or an organization. It was me speaking. And me speaking about, important truth stuff, at least for me anyway. So it was hard, but because of that, it was good to do.
Oh, cool. Before we kind of wrap up, I'm always conscious of time. Is there anything you would like to talk about or plug before we go? And please feel free to plug West again and our team, or whatever you wish.
Yeah, so let's plug West and let's plug what we do. So we're running West. It's a pilot program. If it works, I would hope there'll be more of it. But if you're interested in offshore wind, you can come and access experts like Steve and I to help you understand offshore wind, help you make your move into it. But equally, outside of West, what we're also trying to build is a network of experts who can do that as well, within and without a funded program. And we pride ourselves in working with you and listening to you as an organization. We're not a type of consultancy who tells you everything you need to know, but says, well, where are we starting from? What do you already know? What gaps do you need to fill in? And the work I've been doing and the success I do seems to flow from that, of not trying to pretend I know everything, but trying to pretend I know my bit. But if I am open to listening to companies tell me their bit, we can create something and they've got more confidence to go forwards. So get in touch with me, get in touch with Steve, and we can help you do more of that.
Cool. Well, I can't quite see the clock. I think that's give or take 40, 50 minutes. So I think we'll wrap up there, but thank you for your time. I'm sure I'll probably speak to you tomorrow on work stuff. But I just wanted to kind of share the message on renewables, on floating wind, on lots of different kind of stuff that's going around. And then likewise, introduce everyone to Maf as well, who's obviously a partner that I'm working with. And I'm sure we've known each other for 10 years. So hopefully in another 10 years, we'll keep doing this.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Steve.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time, and I'll log off. And if you've got any questions for me or Maf, please send them in and we'll answer them however we can. Cool. Cheers, mate.
Great.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Bye-bye.